Americans For Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans For Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, May 3rd, 2019. The first federal excise tax on gasoline was 1 cent when it was first instituted in 1932. Since 1993, it has been 18.4 cents per gallon of gasoline, 24.4 cents a gallon on diesel fuel, and has not been adjusted for the approximately 73% of inflation since then. That means it takes $1.73 in today's dollars to purchase what $1 bought in 1993. Now, of course, the states have seen excise taxes on gasoline and diesel to be very lucrative sources of revenue. According to the American Petroleum Institute, here are the high and low ends on what residents of various states pay in tax on gasoline and diesel fuel. California taxes gasoline at 55.18 cents a gallon. Add the 18.4 cents in federal tax, and California residents shell out 73.58 cents a gallon in gas tax. California taxes diesel at 85.83 cents a gallon. Add the 24.4 cents federal tax, and California residents pay a whopping $1.10 a gallon in tax on diesel fuel. New York state gas tax is 45.35 cents a gallon. Add the 18.4 cents for the federal tax, and taxes account for 63.75 cents of the cost of every gallon of gas in New York. For diesel, it's 45.32 cents a gallon in state tax, 24.4 cents a gallon in federal tax, for a total of 69.72 cents in tax for every gallon of diesel fuel sold in New York. Now, at the other end of the scale, Texas charges just 20 cents a gallon in state tax for both gas and diesel. Add in the federal taxes, and Texas residents pay just 38.4 cents a gallon in gas tax, 44.4 cents a gallon on diesel. Now, of course, you really have no idea how much tax you pay on motor fuel. These taxes are hidden in the pump price, and they're not shown on your receipt. You just fill up your tank and go on your merry way, having no idea how much money the state, federal, and in some places local tax men just extracted from your pocket. So what are the reasons that state and federal politicians like the fuel tax? Here are some. Almost 60% of the value of all goods transported in the U.S. is carried by 18-wheel trucks. Now, these 18-wheelers average between 4.5 and 6.5 miles per gallon. That means they buy a lot of fuel. The taxes paid by the 18-wheelers are passed along to the purchasers of the goods being transported and are hidden from consumers, a thing politicians love. Politicians can also blame the oil companies for the high price of fuel, knowing that almost no consumer will even think about the amount of tax they're paying at the pump. Sometimes for work and sometimes for pleasure, almost all of us purchases fuel, and we all pay the tax. Now, politicians can chide anyone that protests about fuel taxes by explaining that it's simply a charge paid by people who use the roads. If you don't use the roads, you don't have to pay the tax. Now, fuel tax is also very difficult to evade because it's embedded in the price we pay for fuel. It's simply collected by the oil companies, then forwarded to the appropriate government authority. Evasion is all but impossible. So let's look at why the fuel tax is regressive. Investopedia defines a regressive tax as, quoting here, a tax applied uniformly, thereby taking a larger percentage of income from low-income earners than from high-income earners. Now, here's some of the reasons that state and federal fuel taxes are regressive and punish lower-income Americans. Lower-income people almost always drive older cars, which generally get fewer miles per gallon than newer cars, meaning that low-income drivers pay more in fuel taxes than people getting better mileage while driving the same number of miles. Lower-income people spend a greater percentage of their income on fuel taxes than a higher-income person does who drives the same number of miles. And like the equally regressive payroll tax, it doesn't matter if the person purchasing fuel and paying the fuel taxes has 1 child or 10 children. Now, the politicians are talking out of both sides of their mouths and just hoping no one figures it out. Many politicians believe that if they say the right things, then it's not really necessary to do the right things. For example, it seems to be a requirement of politicians to say that they're all concerned about increasing the federal budget deficit and why it's important that all new expenses be paid for from new or existing revenues. And of course, we all know what keeps happening to the budget deficit. Of course, all of us understand that the most important thing to the politicians in the swamp is for us to think that our representatives are providing benefits for us. Now, this isn't new. Politicians in ancient Rome were staging gladiator fights and providing bread to placate the citizens right up to the time the Roman Empire collapsed. Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer represent California and New York, respectively. They regularly make statements about how we need to show more compassion for the less fortunate. However, they have two of the highest state fuel tax rates in the nation, and they are adversely affecting the people that they say they want to help. In fact, they're doubling down. President Trump, Speaker Pelosi, and Senator Schumer recently met and announced that they were in general agreement on an infrastructure package. Pelosi and Schumer apparently are advocating that the federal fuel tax rates be increased to help pay for the infrastructure enhancements that they are advocating. Now, here's an alternative, non-regressive way to fund that infrastructure. Imagine the discussion over funding the proposed infrastructure package if the fair tax replaced the present income payroll tax system. Here's what would happen. Congressional leaders and the president meet and determine the cost of the infrastructure package. A calculation would be made of the annual budget needed. Assuming that the cost could not be paid from current income, then the U.S. Treasury would calculate the amount that the 23% fair tax rate would need to be increased. Then, of course, the congressional leaders can draft legislation to fund the infrastructure package by increasing the fair tax rate to a specified percentage and to get the agreement of the president. The next step will be for members of Congress and the president to go around the country and convince the voters that the proposed infrastructure package and the addition to the fair tax rate was in their best interests. And then at the next election, the people will decide if the members and the president were right about that to increase the fair tax rate to pay for the infrastructure package. In conclusion, everything stated above is contrary to the way that the swamp and most members of Congress think. You can see them looking at the above statements as not only improper, but rash and dangerous. Let the people see the actual cost of the law that Congress enacted and how it affects their personal consumption by seeing the increase in the fair tax rate in every purchase? Horrifying. They may have to actually answer some questions on why the cost for implementing the actions specified in the law seems so much higher than what others pay for the same service. This is frightening because then the special deals that the swamp and members of Congress have made for their friends will be challenged. You ask, won't the increase in the fair tax rate be regressive? The answer is simple, no. Congress can just increase the monthly prebate, the tax credit, by an amount to ensure that people do not pay the increased amount of fair tax until they spend more on new goods and retail services than the poverty level for their household size. This additional cost will be included in the calculation of the addition to the fair tax. Now, most people will agree that the best way for a government to treat its people is to be frank and honest with them about the things for which the people are being asked to pay. Most people will also agree that the swamp and Congress will resist this attempt to empower people to allow them to be truly rulers of their own destiny and not just mindless slaves of the swamp and some members of Congress. The author George Bernard Shaw said these words in a play he wrote, "You see things and you say why, but I dream things that never were, and I say, why not?" Isn't it about time for us to start asking, why not?
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org or bigsolution.org.